everyone, welcome back to Thought Crime and Keto and Crime. Thank you for joining me today. Today we've got the first in a three-parter, yes, three-parter that will run boom, 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 day after day. Today, Sunday, we're going to get the main part. Then we're going to get a book review associated with this subject, and then we're going to get an interview with somebody that was actually in this movement that I hesitate to call a cult because it's not really an organized denomination on its own, but we're going to get to that. But first, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. I want to say thank you to all my new subscribers. It's wonderful. Welcome. I have lots of videos here. Go back and watch them. Really appreciate all the love, all the support. As a true crimer and history channel, I would say 30 to 35% of my videos are demonetized. So if you want to support the channel, I have a Patreon link below. I have a PayPal link below. I'll also link Patreon right up here. And I also want to give a shout out to my fabulous patrons. And we had our first Patreon only live stream last night. And I got to catch up with the wonderful Demelzo Pascal. One-on-one was great. So I hope that in the next 2 weeks when we have another one, more of my patrons will join because we had a blast. Anyway, let me give those wonderful, wonderful ladies a shout out. The Dynamite Demelzo Pascal, who I spent about an hour with chatting last night. Great time. I also got to meet her very lovely daughter, Chloe, so shout out to Chloe. Also got the luscious Lauren Kirk, the stupendous Sarah Carney, the awesome Andrea Lee, the tumultuous Tabora Simmons Cooper, and the dynamite, stupendous Stephanie Mertz. Thank you so much for your support of the channel. It means a lot. Stephanie, be checking the mail. I've got you a little gift coming from our merch store. And Andrea's, yours should be coming soon. So there you go. So we have some wonderful behind the scenes videos over there. Chats. It's wonderful. And I also take my patron suggestions for subjects, as I do everybody. So just a wonderful time over there. I can't express my gratitude enough. And now to get on with today's video. And the most important thing you can do to make sure that more people see this video, because we're creating awareness here, hit that like button, give it a share, give a comment, let me know what you think if you've ever heard of this. But let's get into it. Y'all, the Quiverfull movement. Have you ever watched 19 Kids and Counting? The Duggars? Have you ever watched Welcome to Batesville? Any of those TLC shows with the very large families? Well, they are members of a movement known as Quiverfull. And I can't really call Quiverfull a cult because it's not an organized religion. It's not an organized denomination on its own. It is a theological position or a theological movement based on a very legalistic, fundamentalist view of Scripture. Specifically, Psalm 127, verses 3 through 5, in which the author says, "Lo, children are a heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hand of mighty men, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed. They shall speak with the enemies in the gate." Which honestly to me sounds like a lot of children is a good security system. You're just going to put them all at the gate and they're going to speak with enemies therein and keep them there out. That's what it sounds like to me. But I know a lot of people don't interpret it that way. But what I want to know is why, just like the snake handlers that base their entire religion off one chapter and a couple of verses in Mark, which were added after the fact, why does the Quiverfull movement base an entire movement off of a psalm, which the Proverbs and the Psalms were supposedly written by Solomon or David? We don't even really know, and they really weren't scripture. They weren't handed down from a prophet. They were just poems and songs that were written in praise of a god. So basically, you've based an entire movement off a song lyric. But in retrospect, I can't really say anything because I have obviously based my entire life off Weird Al Yankovic's Just Eat It. So, I can't really, comment on that, Quiverfull, but it's just interesting as to why you chose a psalm, which is obviously a song. So you're basing your movement off of song lyrics. And if there's anyone out there that's Quiverfull that wants to come at me, just do it politely. I will banter with anyone. I don't really care. I've bantered with white supremacists. I've bantered with extreme leftists. I've bantered with everyone, both in comments, email, everything. I don't care. I will talk to you. But just be respectful. If you bring hate into my comments, you'll be deleted, because we're a friendly, supportive, intelligently discussing community here. Just letting you know. So basically, think of a quiver of arrows. A quiver is the little sling on the back of one's back or on one side that you carry your arrows in. So you've seen them. If you watch Braveheart, if you've watched Game of Thrones, if you've watched Vikings, you've seen it. Anyway, so basically they believe in lots and lots of children, which is why I brought up the Duggars and the Bates, because they have lots and lots of children. They don't practice any man-made birth control. The only birth control method which is even remotely used within a Quiverfull family is extended breastfeeding, where you breastfeed for 6 to 7 months, because technically a woman supposedly can't get pregnant during breastfeeding because of hormonal shift. So that's the only, and why did I do that? Anyway, that's why they use that, because technically you're not supposed to be able to get pregnant. Definitely not foolproof. Definitely not foolproof. But other than that, no other birth control, because in this movement, which actually originated in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as a pushback towards 19th Amendment, towards birth control, towards women leaving the home and doing something other than cleaning, cooking, and giving birth. It was a pushback to that, a very conservative, in this country, Christian pushback, though it's not exclusive to Christian religion. There are religions all over the world, Islam, other religions that practice the same sort of thing. Large families, women that are under the patriarchal control of their husbands, and so there's a lot of religions that practice the same sort of thing, but I am exclusively focusing on the Quiverfull as it pertains to Christianity in the United States. So just bear that in mind. So it was a pushback to the advent of both women's rights and specifically birth control. And I don't even want to bring Roe versus Wade into this, because that's an entirely different discussion. But it was a pushback to that, where both men and women who were opposed to that decided to go back to what they considered true Christianity, true spiritual adherence to the commandments of God, and enter a very legalistic way of worshiping and adhering to a Christian lifestyle. Now, in the 20th century, the modern-day Quiverfull movement can be traced to a lady named Nancy Campbell, who started publishing a magazine called Above Rubies. Now, there's also another Proverbs that says, who has a faithful wife, her value is above rubies, and her husband shall have no want of wealth for listening to her. Something along those lines. And I apologize, I don't have that exact psalm here. I should, but I don't. But it's there. You can look it up. Anyway, she started publishing this magazine in the mid-70s, which encouraged women to be that kind of wife, that supportive yet submissive wife that is spoke about specifically in the Old Testament of the Bible. And so lots of women started reading this magazine. Also, another book by the name of, published in 2014 actually, by a woman by the name of Debbie Pearl, called Born to be His Helpmeet. And it is basically a reiteration of what was published in Campbell's magazine. And don't worry about the pearls. We're going to get into the pearls. They get their own video. But so this was the sort of literature that was published in pushback against birth control. And there was this whole fundamentalist resurgence in the late 19th century, early 20th century, that started to push women back to that more fundamentalist look. There were also other books by the name of a writer by the name of Mary Pride in 1985 wrote The Way Home Beyond Feminism, Back to Reality, essentially spouting the very same things that Mary Campbell's magazine did, telling women children were a gift, you should have as many as you should, but that wasn't it. There was also, you should never, we're going to get into all that. We're going to get into all of that. Let's just put it this way. If you're looking at this Quiverfull movement, they very much adhere to the umbrella, and I'm going to insert a clip here where I talk about that. And here is the umbrella of protection that a lot of fundamentalist families, particularly in the Quiverfull movement, adhere to. On the top you have Christ, which is just Christ. He does Christ things. And then probably underneath there you have, and this would be God for a non-Christian family, or Allah, or whomever. And underneath there would probably be your church, synagogue, mosque, and the elders there. And then out from under that into more secular at the family level, you would have the husband who, according to the Institute for Basic Life Principles and ATI, Bill Gothard, by design, the husband is destined to protect and provide for the family, so he's next. And then you have the wife doing what she is destined to do, manager of the children and of the home, and then the children don't even really appear because they are under everyone's authority. So this is kind of that authority trickle down as it relates to a lot of fundamentalist families. But in the Pride book, she talked about how she was an ardent feminist and how her marriage was falling apart, her family was falling apart, and then she found her way home and submitted to the authority of her husband at home and kind of restored her marriage, restored her family, and that is the woman's place, to submit to the authority of their husband at home and to be a bearer of children. Now, what gets me about a lot of these women that talk about this, Campbell, Pearl, and Pride, all have one thing in common. They tell women they should not have a career outside of the home, because when women left the home, that's when the whole family disintegrated. But they themselves have careers outside the home. They are activists for this. They are authors, and they travel around, or did travel around, speaking about this kind of stuff. So they have a career outside of the home. I don't understand how they can, with a straight face, tell women you shouldn't pursue anything. Now, again, disclaimer here, I have nothing against homemakers, housewives. It's not what I choose to be. My wife kind of assumes that role in our marriage. She does work, but she works from home just like I do, but she works less hours than I do, so she kind of assumes the role of cooking and cleaning and taking care of the dogs, although I help with that. But if you were going to assign us to roles, she kind of assimilated into that role. But do I think that that's all that she is able to do? No, of course not. She can do what she worked outside the home for a long, long time. We finally had that agreement in her opinion, with my education and what I do, I can earn more money than her, so why not? So, okay, fine, that's our agreement, but we can alter our agreement at any time. She has the power to alter that agreement. The women that are in this movement don't have the power to alter that agreement. That's the difference. It's very much a patriarchal society with men at the top, then women, then children, and all the way, even above the man, is God or the church. So, yeah, women don't have the power to create their own destiny. Their destiny has been laid out for them, and it's not something that is subject to disagreement or change, whereas men, possibilities are limitless. That's why I'm speaking out against this, because I think it's terrible when anybody, regardless of gender, is relegated to certain roles because that's what they've been told that's all they're worth. That, to me, there's so many. What gets me, and this is a soapbox, and I'll get back to the actual report, but here in the West, we have so many opportunities, and it makes me mad and angry and sad when I see women that have more opportunity in the West than they do anywhere else. The United States, Canada, Western Europe. Women have more opportunity than in any other country in the world. And to willingly go back to this model, it makes me sick. I'm not saying that I believe in broken homes. No, I believe the dissolution of the two-parent home has been a great degradant to our society. I wish there were measures to bring fathers back home, to make families two-parent again. But even with that, with the rising cost of things and stagnant wages, you can't make it on one income unless you have, certain things like a paid-for house or something like that. You really can't. So I have a lot of friends that are homemakers, but they all do something on the side. They all have side hustles. They do online businesses. They tutor. They bring in an income. So I think the whole retrospect of that 1950s housewife, or even earlier than that, except for maybe the homesteaders, which, everybody worked the farm, women did the housework, men did the outside work, and lots of times the women did the outside work too. Beyond that, when you get into the 1950s and 60s, that housewife, that never existed. That never existed. My grandmother was married to my grandfather for 51 years. About 10 of them were good. He was an alcoholic. He abused her. Yes, she stayed home, but for the majority, she would work nights. She worked nights in restaurants. That whole June Cleaver, that didn't exist. The good old days that everybody talks about didn't exist because it just didn't. There was strife in the home that no one saw. There was abuse and tyranny and just cruelty that existed in some of those homes. My grandmother told me all about her experience. It was never good. It didn't exist. And so we're trying to reach for something outside of maybe Little House on the Prairie. And some of these women that are in this movie said that Little House on the Prairie was one of the worst things that ever happened for women, that it was a feminist call series. And I'm like, really? Laura Ingalls? And I've read all those books. That's a feminist call. Yeah, Laura Ingalls was a strong woman. Her daughter Rose went on to be one of the founders of the Libertarian Party. The more you know. Yeah, they were strong women. Strong women, but it's okay to be a strong woman. It's okay to be a strong man. Feminism, as I see it, is all about equality. It's not about women should have more rights than men. I think the divorce court system is totally slanted toward women. I think it's very cruel toward men. I think that needs to be reformed. I think automatic alimony and child support need to be reformed. I want us to be a completely equal society. Outside of the biological differences between men and women, the strength and physical differences between men and women, I think we should be equal in all aspects. That's my opinion. That's old school feminism in my ability, and I don't see that as a detriment, and I don't see family planning as a detriment. Am I pro-choice? Yes. Do I believe in abortion? No. Would I have an abortion? No. But I don't feel it's my duty to tell Sarah over there that she can't have an abortion. I also think that it's wrong to have tax money pay for it. So I'm a little bit conservative in that issue. I know that there's limits to what the tax money goes for, but I think any tax-funded sort, I understand how somebody that's vehemently against abortion at all would have a problem with their tax money going to. I understand that. What's the solution to that? I don't know, because I don't want us to ever go back to the days before Roe versus Wade, and now I'm off my soapbox. I'm getting back to the material at hand. So sorry. So beyond these books, you had a whole movement of people that really went back to the basics, went back to the literal interpretation of the biblical marriage, but they're kind of skewed because in the Old Testament, biblical marriage was not a man and a woman. It was a man and lots of women, or man and a woman and several concubines. That whole one man, one woman does not exist in the Old Testament. It doesn't. It's not there. But yet they see it. But like I said, they base this whole movement on a song lyric. But anyway, this movement meets every single one of the Atlantic and other publications, 9 Steps to Being a Cult, meets every single one of them. But I can't call it a cult because it's not an organized church. It's not an organized religion. It's a movement that can exist in any religion, any Christian denomination. But there tend to be certain denominations that gravitate toward it. Let's talk about the most prominent one within the Quiverfull movement that kind of lends itself to these beliefs. Independent Baptist. The Duggars are Independent Baptist. I believe the Bates are Independent Baptist. Any Baptist church that does not adhere to either regular Baptist or Southern Baptist doctrine would fall into this. And then there's also other call signs for it. Primitive Baptist. Then you can even find this in Pentecostal churches. But Independent Baptist is a huge call sign for we are a Quiverfull movement believing church. So when you think of the Quiverfull movement, just think of absolute patriarchy, absolute submission for a woman, and children. Lots of children. They don't believe in birth control. And as a result, you have huge families with one working parent. For the most part, though that definition and that perception is going to be turned on its head with my interview with Vicki Garrison, who actually escaped this movement and now runs an outreach to help women out of it. And on Tuesday, you'll see that interview. But as a result, women cook, clean, bear children, and educate the children. One of the major premises of this movement is isolation. They isolate from the rest of the world because they don't want children picking up on what they consider secular values. So you'll find very few Quiverfull children going to public school. You might find some of them in private religious schools, particularly if the religious school is ran by a Quiverfull movement believing denomination. But for the most part, they are homeschooled. And the homeschooling materials are the key to keep people in this. And we're about to study one of the big ones, one of the big homeschooling curriculums that is used in this movement to kind of keep people on the same page. So you have highly isolated children. You have most of them isolating from movies, from televisions. There's houses with no television, limited internet access, where they have parental blocks on everything that is considered non-secular to the movement. And you have an understanding that the girls are educated less than the boys in a lot of reasons. They adhere to state regulations most of the time, but because of United States religious freedom laws and properties, it's hard to prosecute these cases. So lots of times women in these movements, the children, the girls, are educated a lot less than the boys. You'll find this in Islamic countries too, where schooling stops at 6th grade or 8th grade for women. So they keep women ignorant. Lots of times they're not allowed to get a driver's license. They're not allowed to date outside of anyone except those that the parents have chosen for them. Courting is very much a thing in these households where the parents help choose the potential mate, and then they are not allowed to be along with them. They are fully chaperoned. They can only hold hands after they are engaged, and they cannot even kiss until their wedding day. So this is very strict. If you've seen those videos about promise rings and purity pledges, that can many times be a call sign for a Quiverfull type family. So just keep that in mind. But it's very much keeping people in the dark. They're not allowed to consume anything outside of what their church, their movement wants them to see, what their parents want them to see. Now, Independent Baptists are a huge denomination in this. Stephen Anderson, who runs the Faithful Word Baptist Church in Tempe, Arizona, you can Google him. He's been banned in several countries because of his extreme views toward women and gays and everything. I mean, he wants to toss people like me off of rooftops like they do in Islamic countries. Personally, I don't want that to ever be a thing, so I don't like Stephen Anderson, though I found his wife Suzanne's YouTube channel here on YouTube, and she speaks very eloquently. She actually did a review of the same book that I'm going to do a review of, The Pearl to Bring Up to Teach a Child book, And a lot of her views on it, I believe. But do I believe her entire... No, because... No. But Stephen Anderson is a member of this movement. Michael Pearl, who is Debbie Pearl's husband, who wrote the book we're going to review as part of this expose called To Train Up a Child, is a book riddled with child abuse and breaking the will of children. And these are very much a lot of the parenting techniques that a lot of these families follow. It's almost as if children, especially girls, have no choice. And they are educated and bred just to become a housewife. Because of the large amount of children, often the mothers can't do anything. And they're also physically exhausted, and it breaks down their bodies. There's a max amount of children that a human woman can have without it starting to break down her body. And it's not as many as you think. So you have women becoming physically exhausted, ill, because of the amount of children that they're having. They do this against their doctor's advice. A lot of these people start to resort to using midwives that are of the same belief system they are, or just doing straight at-home births and hoping that nothing goes wrong, because many times doctors advise against this and try to encourage the women to have, their tubes tied or have the husband have a vasectomy, which is totally not done. So you have complete isolation. Lots of them, they live in usually very rural areas because cost of living is cheaper. I mean, think about it. There are still state laws and stuff about what constitutes child rearing and child abuse. Now, I'm not saying that the state should have a hand in helping to raise a child. No, but I believe that limitations on what can happen with the child prevents things like those kids that were found chained in their bedroom. So, yeah, I believe there's some limitations that should be placed there. But in a lot of states, you're not allowed to have more than 2 children to a room, and they have to be of the same gender if they're over a certain age. So you have these families that have 10, 12, 19 children, like the Duggars. They have to have huge homes, which are not cheap. Even in cheap, less expensive rural areas, you're talking about $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 for a large house. I think the Duggars, from what I know, built theirs from a kit, and they had like community help to do it. So maybe they got away with it cheaper, but you have to have huge houses, and you have to have a huge income, because can you imagine supporting 8, 10, 12 children and on one income, theoretically, the father's income? I mean, a lot of these families end up on public assistance as a result. That's a little known fact. Some of them end up on public assistance. And I say they're gaming the system the same as the purported welfare queens are gaming the system. So, in any case, don't have more children than you can support. That's the thing. So, the isolation, sometimes poverty that these people live in is just... and then they train their children to go into these very same types of relationships through the homeschooling, through arranged marriages, through the ritual of courting, where the parents have absolute chaperoning power over the couples, and that's how they sustain this movement. You're born into it. I know of, there's a few women, I'm sure, out there that go into it because, like Vicki Garrison, the one we're going to talk to, she went into it willingly. But there's, for the most part, people that are in it because they are raised in it. But a lot of the children, they go their own way when they're out and about. And lots of times they are shunned or, disowned because they've gone their own way. But just think of it as a very controlled way of living. And the main way that it's done, if it's not through the church, because lots of these families are not in areas where a Quiverfull believing independent Baptist or another denomination exists, so they do their home churching. They'll have a couple of families that are, will have services or Bible study in their homes, and that's their church. So there's a lot of social isolation. But the main way they keep people in check is through homeschooling. And the king of that homeschooling curriculum that is used in these families was created by a man named Bill Gothard, and that's who we're going to talk about right now. Bill Gothard was born November 2nd, 1934 in rural Illinois. He was the son of William Gothard Sr. and Christina Gothard, formerly Torres. And his father worked for many evangelical Christian organizations, specifically the Gideons would be the most well-known, the organization that puts Bibles in hotel rooms and such. So he worked for the Gideons, and as a result, young Bill was exposed to religion from an early age. He didn't do so well in school. He was held back in first grade and was tentatively passed along throughout elementary school until he was finally graduated. So many people think that that's why Bill Gothard has such a disdain for public education. He rails against it. He rails against secular or non-religious higher education, and he rails against it for women in general. So because of his such poor performance in public school, many people think that's why he hates public education the way that he does, and why he was drawn to create homeschooling curriculum. Now, in the homeschooling realm, and I don't want homeschoolers to come for me in general, because there are many, one of my dear cousins homeschools both of her children, and she does a fabulous job, but she's also college educated and highly, highly motivated. So they do just fine, but she uses a public school curriculum, like a state curriculum, so her children are getting the same curriculum that her children would get in a public school here in Tennessee. But there's also the religious curriculum. And that's where a lot of these Quiverfull families get their education, and where Bill Gothard is king, pretty much. So there are two types of homeschoolers, good and bad. I'm not saying all religious curriculum is bad. As long as it teaches the basics, reading, writing, arithmetic, and science, I'm fine with it. But it's when you start teaching crap like, we don't know where this is an actual quote from a Gothard textbook, but we don't know where electricity comes from, but it's here and it's all around us. As long as you're not teaching stuff like that, go ahead. As long as you're not teaching the world is 6,000 years old, I'm fine with it, because we have carbon dating that proves extreme opposite of that. So as long as you're teaching a good foundation, I don't have a problem if you throw some faith in there. That's not what I'm about, but don't teach fantasy and don't teach lies to your children. So if you're a homeschooling mom or dad out there that's adequately teaching your children, don't come for me. I'm not talking to you. I'm specifically referring to Gothard here. All right. So he did attend college. He received a BA in Biblical Studies from Wheaton College in 1957 and a Master of Arts in Christian Education in 1961, also from Wheaton. He was conveyed an honorary PhD from Louisiana Baptist University in 2004. And while on campus at Wheaton, he started an organization in 1961 called Campus Teams, which officially changed its name in 1974 to the Institute for Basic Youth Conflicts. And Campus Teams, or the Institute for Basic Youth Conflicts, started as a premise in his master's thesis for his master's in Christian education. So he had this dream of why children stray, why the world has become such a sinful place, and it's because we aren't adhering to simple principles that were put forth from the creation of time. That's essentially it in a nutshell. And so he created this Campus Teams organization which later became his nonprofit, which is still functioning today, the Institute for Basic Youth Conflicts, which taught these principles. Over the years, that has changed, and in 1989, he changed it to what it is known to today, the Institute in Basic Life Principles, IBLP. You will hear lots of people talk about that when they talk about homeschooling. I use an IBLP curriculum. That is Bill Gothard's institution. And he was the president and a board member until 2014. We'll get into that. But he also, as a part of that, founded what is known as the Advanced Training Institute, which is the homeschooling curriculum we're going to talk about. The Institute in Basic Life Principles teaches this universally. He has conventions, which are heavily, heavily attended. He creates all kinds of adult studies and religious studies as part of the IBLP. But he also has the Advanced Training Institute, which is specifically a children's homeschooling program. And from what I understand, it is a very expensive program. So if you are a Quiverfull family that is using this, then you have money, because this isn't cheap. And so he uses it to teach the principles that I'm about to relay to you. Okay, the basic life principles start with design. Design. It basically says that a person is created by their God for a specific purpose. And a person's attitude toward himself has a profound influence on his attitude toward God, his family, his friends, future, and other significant areas of life. So this is where the whole institute or position of gender roles comes from. You are designed for a specific purpose, and you have to find that purpose and follow that purpose. For boys, that is to be the protector and provider for a home, although the way you get there, your career, that's most times up to you. But for women, it's you're to be the homemaker, the teacher, and a helpmate to your husband and submit to his authority. And that's all you are. You have no free range. He doesn't believe in higher education for women. That's design. Authority. Authority is your willingness to submit to God-ordained authority. For men, that is God or the hierarchy of a church if you attend one. And for women, not only God and the church, but that's your husband. And for children, that's mom, dad, God, church, what have you. So you have to adhere to God-ordained authority. Responsibility is the next principle. And it is just taking responsibility for every word, thought, and action. Like I said, even a broken clock is right twice a day. I do believe that responsibility is key to anyone's life. You have to take responsibility for your own actions and your own words. So I'll give him props for that one. Suffering is his next basic life principle, which says that turning away from God will provide unordained suffering, whereas ordained suffering, like the pain of childbirth, like perhaps being in an abusive relationship, because a lot of the leaders in this movement, including Debbie Pearl, have been quoted as telling women in a very physically abusive relationships to stay in it because divorce isn't done. So some suffering is required. Ownership, that you are stewards of what God has given you, not owners, and you need to use it for the kingdom of God based on Gothard's own design. Freedom, that's funny. Freedom toward making decisions and desires to fulfill your stewardship toward God. Yeah, men have that, not women, not so much. I'm all about equality over here. And then success, again, okay, men can achieve this, but not women. And even though it's not appropriately stated that it's anti-woman, when you get into the curriculum and the gender roles that are assigned and life roles that are assigned to people within this movement, women are controlled right down to how they dress. They have to wear the long skirts and a lot of I mean, there was a whole scandal. One of the Duggar daughters actually was photographed wearing shorts on her honeymoon. I mean, you're controlled right down to what you wear, what you think. So it depends on this. And this is the curriculum that in lots of ways is taught to children in this movement. Even if a family that can't afford the Gothard, the Advanced Training Institute materials, lots of the other cheaper curriculums that are taught also use these principles. And if a person is fully building their own curriculum, they will often get used textbooks from these same authors. They will find old, public school books like for literature, stuff like that they don't think is going to influence. And they will build their own curriculum, which is dangerous in its own right. I mean, homeschooling needs to be regulated to a certain extent, and a lot of the things that they do, if they can't afford a full curriculum, I think fall very substandard to real education. So Gothard was known to hang around with the Huckabees in Arkansas, Sarah Palin, and of course the Duggars. And in the 1980s, his brother Stephen was found to be having affairs with several female secretaries at the Institute's offices, and was subsequently removed from his leadership position, and it was said that Bill knew about it. Well, of course he did. And finally, Bill, in 2014, was found guilty of his own sexual improprieties. Several women came forward saying that he made inappropriate advances toward them as minors. And this is ironic because Gothard teaches that dating is wrong, sex outside of marriage is wrong. He teaches that Christian rock, Christian music is wrong, that courtship is the preferred method and that it should be chaperoned. And he also taught that Cabbage Patch Kids were idolatrous. Cabbage Patch Kids. Ugly, yes. Idolatrous, no. I had one. I loved her. Her name was Lorna Marie. Never mind. I'm not going to get into that. But anyway, in 2014, he was placed on leave by the board of the Institute in Basic Life Principles and was fully investigated. Nothing criminal was ever filed. I think probably in lots of ways the statute of limitations had expired. But you see this. You see this in a lot of families that adhere to this, a lot of sexual abuse. Look what happened with Josh Duggar. Because sex is taught to be so taboo and so dirty that children don't fully get to come into puberty and come into puberty in a normal way. So you will always find threads of sexual impropriety, sexual deviancy in these families. It's just the way. Plus, with the amount of children that they have, you play the laws of averages, there's some gay children in there. And that's also not... I'm willing to bet one of the Duggar children is gay. I mean, they don't come for me, but it's just the law of averages. They got a gay one in there somewhere. In late 2014, Gothard was reinstated, because of course he was, and he relaunched his website in 2015. Civil suits were filed against him in 2016. I'm sure they were settled out of court because I really couldn't find anything on them. But for the most part, that's Bill Gothard, and this is the guy that educates the children, a lot of the children within this movement. And that's the Quiverfull movement. Going back to basics, having a lot of children, and adhering to very strict gender roles. Is it a cult? No, but only because of the fact it's not an organized religion on its own. Are churches that adhere to this cults? Yes, they are. Be very careful. Any religion that strives to control you in and out of church in the most private of areas is probably a cult. So be aware. If leaving the church means you're going to be ostracized from friends, family, and community, probably a cult, and you should probably go ahead and do that. So, anyway, that's Quiverfull in a nutshell. You can see it on TV. TLC seems to have some obsession with it. But that's it in a nutshell. You'll never hear any of those people on TV talk about Quiverfull. They'll say they're not Quiverfull, but when you look at the churches they're members of and what they do, they're Quiverfull. Allegedly. Anyway, guys, thank you so much. Be back tomorrow with my review of Michael Pearl's book. And until then, Keto Comic.